In this mini lesson, we'll be focusing on The Sun Rising by Donne. As is always the case in English, the language you use is very important. You've got 40 minutes to write, and you want to make sure that you're using language that conveys a level of sophistication and complexity. So here are some terms that are useful for the sun rising. We refer to it as an obede, that is a morning love song or poem that's about lovers separating at dawn. We could even refer to this as an inverted obede, simply because the lovers refuse to separate. They don't actually separate. The sun is personified throughout, but Donne also uses an apostrophe. This is not the apostrophe we use when we're writing contractions, but an apostrophe that is a call out towards a person or object that's not actually there in the poem. So because he's speaking to the sun throughout, we could say it's like an extended apostrophe, a call out to the sun. And there is this extended metaphor running through the poem where Donne is saying, we, me and my lover, we are the whole world. That's not literal, it's metaphorical. Please do take notes as we go. Have your poem in front of you and number the lines 1 to 30 for ease of reference. Take a minute to do that now. We can see, just looking at the shape of the poem on the page, it's 3 stanzas, it's 10 lines. We call those dizaines, dis as in 10 in French, and ains as in how many lines are in each stanza, for a total of 30 lines. On screen there are 2 versions of this poem. On the left is the old, archaic and original language, and on the right is a more contemporary, accessible version. When we read the poem through for the first time, I will use the modernised version on the right, and that's just to give you access to the poem's meaning and to eliminate needing to figure out what all the strange spelling actually means. But when we analyse the poem, and of course when you quote it in your essays, you will have to use the original on the left. This poetry is difficult. Don't stress if it takes you a few times before it makes sense for you. That's just normal. And it's always a good idea when you're hearing a poem for the first time to close your eyes as it's read. So the speaker calls out to the sun and says, "Busy old fool, unruly sun, why dost thou thus through windows and through curtains call on us? Must to thy motions lovers' seasons run? Saucy, pedantic wretch, go chide late schoolboys and sour apprentices. Go tell court huntsmen that the king will ride. Call country ants to harvest offices. Love all alike, no season knows, nor climate, nor hours, days, months, which are the rags of time. Thy beams, so reverend and strong, why shouldst thou think I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink? But I would not lose her sight so long, if her eyes have not blinded yours. Look, and tomorrow late tell me whether both the Indias of spice and mine be where thou left them, or lie here with me. Ask for those kings whom you saw yesterday, and thou shalt hear, all here in one bed lay. She's all states and all princes' eye, nothing else is. Princes do but play us. Compared to this, all honour is mimicry, all wealth alchemy. You, son, are half as happy as we, in that the world's contracted thus. Your age asks ease, and since your duties be to warm the world, that's done in warming us. Shine here to us, and you are everywhere. This bed thy centre is, these walls your sphere." Okay, we'll look at the rhyme scheme. It runs throughout the poem, and just looking at the first stanza here, we've got sun and run, line 1 and 4. Thus and us, lines 2 and 3. Chide and ride, C and C. Apprentices and officers, slant rhyme, and the rhyming couplet EE. So it's A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, E, E. And that runs throughout the poem, and it fits the romantic sentiment. It gives it a melodic, euphonic kind of rhythm, and it feels right. And that mimics the all-encompassing totality of their love. Okay, we'll now unpack each stanza in some detail. He calls out to the sun, and he uses denigrating language. Usually the sun is something that is revered and held up on a pedestal because it's life-giving. And yet he refers to it as a busy old fool, as unruly, and later, saucy, pedantic wretch. Pedantic is to be finicky and nitpicky. So he's undermining the sun's power and prestige from the get-go. Then he questions the authority of the sun. He inverts the power dynamic. His tone is irritated, as though the sun is a pest. And he says, through windows and through curtains call on us. Must to thy motions, must to your motions, lovers, seasons run. Like, do you really think our love is going to beat to your drum? He uses active verbs, go chide, go tell, go call. He's in charge. He's the one commanding the sun, telling him what to do. And there's this interesting juxtaposition of all the other ordinary people and insects who are subject to time, like the late schoolboys, the sour apprentices, the country ants. But love knows no season. They're timeless, they're special, they're different, they're distinguished and just separate from ordinary folk because they're out of the bounds of time. When he's referring to love not knowing any seasons or and not knowing days, hours, months, etc., it's as though their love is invincible, and it's consistent and constant. When he's listing the hours, days, months, and so forth that lovers are not subject to, it just helps to elongate the sense of freedom that the lovers have, that they are not like us, subject to ordinary months, days, etc. Donne begins stanza 2 with a reference to the sun's beams being reverend and strong. But then he cleverly undercuts this by saying, hey, I could easily eclipse and cloud them with a wink. Just by shutting my eye, the sun is gone. Then he goes on to say that he couldn't possibly stand to lose sight of his love for even a moment, couldn't even bear to shut his eye for 1 second. And of course that is romantic hyperbole. He continues in this exaggerated tone when he's asking whether the sun has already been blinded by her eyes because they're so bright and beautiful. He continues on with commanding verbs, telling the sun what to do. One of the things he tells the sun to do is to go and check out West and East India. And he says, come back to me and tell me whether all the wealth is over where it was or whether it's in this bed with my love. Again, Donne likes to play around with word order, and he says here that everything is here. This bed is the world, all here in one bed lay. We are the world. It's this exaggerated idea that we are everything. There's nothing beyond me and my love. Just a easy link to context here. East and West India were colonised by Europe during the time that Donne was writing, and the riches of those spices that were being traded and imported are used here to convey the richness and beauty of his love. All the wealth is with him already. In the third stanza, the pace is really slowed down to give it this emphatic and very total, devoted tone. He continues this metaphor that they're everything when he says, "She's all states and all princes I." My favourite line of any 17th century poem is this: "Nothing else is." He's used the flipped word order, inverted syntax there, and high modality, so very, very certain, to express this simple but beautiful idea that nothing else is, full stop. Their love makes everything else seem unimportant. It recedes into the background. They are all that exists. They are the whole world. And when he's referring there at line 3 and 4 to princes playing them, and that all honour is mimicry, a false sort of copycat version, that all wealth is only an attempt at achieving gold. It's not real, not like us. And then he goes on to say that the sun is only half as happy as we. There he says that all states, all princes, all honours, all wealth, and the anaphora of the all, which is a long A sound there, that repetition of the opening word for all of those lines, helps to elongate things. It helps to stretch it out and to echo the all-consuming nature of their love, that it's expansive, it gives it this effusive tone and amplifies the breadth and scope of their love. He later reinforces this by using the assonance, really, of the long A sound again in warm, warming, and walls. Again, conjuring this totality of their love, that they're everything. When he says the world's contracted thus, he's basically saying this is the world. Son, you don't need to go anywhere else. Just warm my bed and you've got the whole world. A lot of inclusive, collective language. Us, we, us, sort of excludes the reader from their world and makes us realise that to them, they're the only thing that matters. This is small, you don't need to worry about it, but if it speaks to you, you can take a note there. The W sound for me in the warming, warm and the walls, warm, world, warming, where, walls, just helps to sort of accentuate the warmth and the fuzziness. It sounds cute. Warm. It's a nice sound. With all Module A units, it's a very good idea to sit for 10 minutes with either a whiteboard or an A3 piece of paper and draw 2 circles that overlap a Venn diagram, where the similarities are in that overlapping section and the differences are in the respective circles. So the earliest text would be on the left and the later text, wit, would be on the right. And you give yourself a good 10 minutes to really think deeply about what is similar and what is different. You'll come up with some silly ideas, as I have, but it's in this deep thinking that we really come to grips with the kind of sentences that we can use to segue between the texts when we begin writing our essays. For example, both of these texts, The Sun Rising and Wit, have similar authorial intentions. Both aim to convey this idea that love is really important, Donne, on the one hand, does it through focusing just on love, but Edson's text is more about the absence of love. So what is included and excluded is interesting. Vivian's attitude to others is really quite unloving at first. When her student asks her for an extension because somebody in the family has passed away, she shows no empathy whatsoever. Whereas Donne is really, really loving in this poem. Both texts take place in just one room. For Donne, it's the bedroom, and for Edson, it's the hospital ward. One is obviously a bed of love and perhaps reproduction, so where life might begin. But for Vivian, sadly, her bed is a bed of disease and decline. Donne's poem has a youthful exuberance to it, whilst Vivian Baring is 50 and facing her own demise. So Vivian Baring, the protagonist of the play Wit, loves Donne's poetry almost as much as he loves his lover, or the speaker of that poem loves his lover, though he loves her for who she is. On the other hand, Vivian loves Donne's poetry because it's challenging and because it attests to her wit and her intelligence. It's a little bit egocentric in a way, rather than altruistic. The depth and breadth of Donne's love poses a stark contrast to the lack of love that Baring has in her life. We can push this idea a little bit. It's not 100% accurate, talking big trends here, but the traditional values about the importance of love in the 17th century in those Elizabethan times have in some way given way to feminist ideals that emphasise the importance of career in the latter half of the 20th century. Got to think it is a time of like Madonna and power suits and so forth in the 80s, 90s, etc. For me, Vivian Baring is the sad product of a life preoccupied with academic brilliance and career at the detriment of her intimate and familial relationships. Where Donne is energised by love, Vivian, on the other hand, is energised by her knowledge of his poetry and her own intelligence. I should stop saying Donne, it's the speaker, but it sounds like Donne. One of the most interesting connections between the sun rising and wit is that Vivian Baring prides herself on being this incredibly capable academic, a scholar of Donne's poetry, and yet she makes no mention of his love poetry, and she has not learned anything about love from his love poetry. So she's myopic. She doesn't see what she's missing really until it's too late, and it's very sad. Unlike Donne, who had plenty of lovers when he was young and married, had 12 children, Vivian has no visitors in hospital. When asked if she has any next of kin or any children, any husband, her answer is no, no, no. Edson's poignant and deliberate positioning of Vivian as one who's lived her life in a misguided way, despite her wit, despite her intelligence, is, I think, Edson's way of telling us that intelligence is not enough. There's more to it, more to life. And it's love, and it's care and compassion and kindness. Compared to Donne's intense expression of love, Vivian's moments of love, because there sort of are moments there with the professor, are but a shadow of the depth and breadth of Donne's. There's also a little bit of love in a very broad sort of Christian sense, I suppose, in just the laughter she has with Nurse Susie, and when they share their popsicle and are relating to one another as two humans rather than patient and nurse. But it's nothing in terms of the intensity of Donne's devotion that he expresses in this poem. I hope this has been useful, and thank you for listening.